99.2 YFM. Does the old apartheid flag offend you? Well, the Nelson Mandela Foundation says it does. They want the old apartheid flag declared as hate speech. But isn't that, erasing history, the very history that we should be brutally honest about? Of course, we are going to be reflecting on both sides of the story. That is, of course, the whole purpose of why we're having the talk today. I have in studio a panel that is well versed in tonight's discussion, or should I say guests, who are very eager to unpack this topic with me. Joining me on the line is Ernest van Zyl. He is from AfriForum. He is part of the communication team there. Now, Ernest believes that the old apartheid flag does not represent hate speech and it should not be banned. I also have Tato Mokoena, who is a former WITS SRC, WITS Honours student and activist. Tato believes that the old South African flag should be indeed banned, so it should go. And then lastly is Tevin Ramalu, a final year BA Law and International Relations student, also from WITS. He also believes that the flag has no place in our country. And perhaps I should start by welcoming Ernest. Ernest, thank you so much for holding. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us tonight.
Absolutely no problem. Thank you very much for having me. I hope everyone's having a good evening and that we can have a constructive, informative conversation and that we can all leave the conversation knowing a bit more about the whole situation and the entire court case.
Definitely. I mean, I'd like to start by getting your perspective on why it is that AfriForum felt that it was very important to be part of this discussion, to be part of the proceedings that are happening in court.
Right. So just from a technical perspective, AfriForum was listed by the Nelson Mandela Foundation as a respondent, and I would then technically call AfriForum a reluctant respondent. So we were given the opportunity. We did not go to them. They listed us. So I think it would be a betrayal of our values if we did not enter the debate when we were given such an invitation.
Just wanted to get your perspective on your opinion on this matter. Should the apartheid flag be kept in our country?
Right. So I think this is an incredibly complex debate. It's not something that is just a simple conversation you can have around a braai fire and get to a nice consensus with everyone. I think because of the controversial history of South Africa, these types of complex debates need to be looked at from all angles. That's why I'm very appreciative that you invited me on tonight to speak with people that do think that it should be banned. Now, AfriForum believes that the old South African flag, or the 1928 flag, should not be banned, seeing as this forms part of a broader debate. This is not just about the flag. This is about the principle of freedom of speech and freedom of expression. The idea of that we, in a free society, you should be able to have bad ideas and good ideas, and you should be able to take on anything, even the offensive, in a civilized and in a debating manner, rather than just trying to cut out everything that is offensive and then in the process limiting the spectrum of freedom and the spectrum of conversation that we have, and then actually taking away from the free society that we should actually have such strong appreciation for that has been built in the last 20 years or so.
All right. So I just want to quickly introduce, of course, your fellow panelists as well, getting a sense of what their take is on the matter. Once I've done that, I mean, we can have a free-flowing discussion or debate about this issue. Is that okay with you, Ernest?
That is 100%.
All right. So I'll start with Tato. I mean, why is it that you want the flag to be banned?
I think so. The flag represents a part of South Africa, a South Africa that sees me and many other black people and black in general people, right, that sees us as less than human, right? And that's what the flag represents. The flag is a South African flag. It's not the flag of a particular sort of group in the country, right, that represents their kind of heritage. It is the South African flag, right? And therefore it is part of my history as much as it is part of AfriForum's history, and I think it's a part of a history that sees me as less human. And I'm saying, as part of that history, it's a history I don't want to be part of. That I don't want to keep seeing the reminder that, in my own country, I was thought of as less human.
Yeah. Tevin, does it make you feel less of a human?
Yes, it does. And to echo Tato's sentiment, is that the flag is a bastion of white supremacy. It has been perpetuated to promote the idea of the superiority of the white race over the non-whites. And I think that we should follow international precedent and follow the steps of of Germany in banning the Nazi flag.
Ernest, of course, the discussion that we've been getting from the people who believe that the flag should be indeed banned is that it represents a time that is very offensive to them, a time that was very hurtful not only for their parents but for young people currently.
No, I think something that's very interesting that needs to be taken into account is seeing as we already made the parallel with Nazi Germany and what Germany has done in the wake of that. I think something interesting that we can look at is, for example, what they did to the concentration camps. Now, the concentration camps in Germany weren't torn down and they weren't erased from the public eye. They were actually turned into monuments to the past in terms of that people can visit them and see what the evil that man is capable of doing, and that we should not forget the past, but rather see where we can go astray and the potential for evil within man's own nature, and the idea of that we might be in a time after World War II and in a time where we haven't seen anything comparable to, for example, the atrocities that happened under Nazi Germany. But we should never forget that those possibilities are always still within us, no matter what generation we are.
All right, Tevin, I'd like Tevin to respond to that. Tevin, Ernest is saying that it equates to erasing our history, and therefore it should be preserved.
Well, I think that I should just give some legal advice to AfriForum, and I would like to say that the Nelson Mandela Foundation does not seek to absolutely ban the apartheid flag from all spheres of the public life. What the foundation is saying is that it can still be displayed for academic reasons, or, for example, in museums, as is done in Germany. So, on the basis of your point, the flag can still be used in spaces that promote history, but it should not be in the general public that reminds us of our subservience.
Ernest, do you think that this is enough?
No. Seeing as what I said earlier, I do hear what you're saying. But I do think what I brought up earlier, the fact that this forms part of a broader debate, the idea of the precedent that this will set in terms of, what is next? Me as an Afrikaans-speaking South African, should I be demanding that the Union Jack be banned, the flag under which my ancestors were put into concentration camps?
Yeah.
The idea of, I think this will set a very dangerous precedent.
About that, right, is that the Union Jack doesn't represent sort of the South African history. That's an important context here, right? That that apartheid flag was a South African flag, and South Africans have the right to choose whether or not they want it, right? The Union Jack, for example, doesn't have to be displayed here, and people who display it in their private homes, it's kind of a separate discussion because it doesn't share the same context. And even then, right, your people are South African, Ernest, right? And your people are saying we don't want that flag, right? And that's kind of the kind of point I want to make, that there isn't the Afrikaner community, there isn't the other community, there is South Africans. And I think by and large, South Africans don't want the apartheid flag.
But are we having a very honest discussion about what the state of our country and a project, reconciliation? For example, Tata, when you say that your people, Ernest, is it really like that in reality? Otherwise, we wouldn't be even having this discussion. Your take, Ernest? So specifically on the issue of reconciliation, are we being honest as South Africans about the state of relations between black and whites, simply put?
I think it was just pure coincidence that I used my own heritage as an example of where this precedent might lead, which could be dangerous in terms of other groups then also demanding certain symbols be banned from the public sphere. But I think another example could be, and it was mentioned in the court today, the idea of we have South Africans living today that escaped from Soviet rule, from communist tyranny. And today, you can still walk around with a flag with the hammer and sickle on. I mean, the South African Communist Party still displays the hammer and sickle. Now, with that group of South Africans, then not only if this precedent is set, with that group of South Africans then not also have a precedent to argue that this is deeply offensive to them, and then demand the banning of the hammer and sickle from the South African public sphere.
All right, let me get Tevin to respond to that.
Well, I would firstly like to respond and say that by banning the old apartheid flag is a stepping stone to banning the Union Jack, because the Union Jack is also a symbol of that white supremacy, and we cannot continue to live as if their sort of glory or their greatness is legitimized. So it is a stepping stone to removing that, and I don't see how it is justified to even portray the Union Jack as something that is glorious. And secondly, when we look at the Soviet Union is not the only representative of communism. Their interpretation and their manifestation of the communistic ideals is not the ethos of communism, and we shouldn't equate that to communism, whereas the apartheid regime took it to an extent where they legalized legal segregation and white supremacy.
Ernest?
All right. No, I'm actually quite interesting to hear that you also see this as a stepping stone. I think that's a very interesting point. But at the same time, you also have to take into account that this, even the old South African flag, was brought into existence in 1928, 20 years before apartheid. So the argument could be made that this is not purely an apartheid flag, as you would, for example, be able to say for the swastika, which was a purely Nazi flag, seeing as that it was the Nazi party's symbol, where the old South African flag, the 1928 flag, was the national flag first that we fought the Nazis under before apartheid was even, 20 years before apartheid was even implemented.
I'm going to need you to hold that thought for me, Ernest, and I really want us to unpack it further when we come back after the break. Of course, we will be taking your calls as well. The old South African flag represents white supremacy. It represents a better life for white people only. Now, that is word from heard at the Equality Court this afternoon. Of course, closing arguments that were delivered on behalf of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Do you agree with this statement? What about inclusiveness? Do we, of course, we live in a democracy. Shouldn't we then protect people's freedom to express themselves? To learn and preserve their culture, in inverted commas, but at what cost when their culture is said to be oppressive? And I'd like to just pick up with you, Ernest, just to get your personal perspective on what the flag actually means to you.
So is this a separate question, before we move back to the previous point before the break, just for clarity?
Yes, we will get back to that. I just want to get your perspective personally about what the flag means to you, just in case people have joined in, on the conversation, just to get a bit more background on what we're talking about.
So me personally, I was born after 1994. I never did anything under the flag. I never served under it. I was never, even I didn't vote under it. I was not even born when it was in use. So I have absolutely no feelings towards the flag.
If you have no feelings towards a flag, why is it that you are on the side of, people, or the argument that says that, it should be preserved?
That's a good question. Well, I think that's the very point of it all. The fact that even though that it would not affect me in any way if the flag was banned, it is still a bigger debate regarding freedom of speech that is the big crux of it all. And that will affect me and millions of South Africans if our freedom of speech is encroached on, if this precedent is set. Therefore, I am on the side of not banning the flag, not because banning of the flag would affect me in any way, but rather that the precedent that is set will, in the long term, affect me and all my fellow South Africans around me and our democracy in general.
I mean, we have people who are saying that the flag affects them, and the display of the flag, gives them literally pain. Your perspective of that?
Well, I can understand it. I mean, I can't, seeing from my own perspective, I can't say that I feel physical pain, but I do understand that some people find it deeply offensive. That is not something foreign to me. That is not an alien concept to me. But at the same time, I also understand how a myriad of symbols are found offensive by a large group of people. Not only the South African flag, but countless other symbols are also found offensive by millions of South Africans. So at the same time, I do think that I will definitely not discredit anyone's feelings of offense. But at the same time, I do not think offense alone constitutes enough justification to set us down this path of just banning or outlawing anything that might be found offensive.
I mean, Tato, what we're clearly getting from Ernest is that there is no offense here. They're not trying to, hurt people. But at the end of the day, we live in a democratic state, and it is about the freedom of expression.
And I agree, but there also comes the sort of right dignity, right? And that is the point, right? That, like, you're free to say whatever you want to the extent that it doesn't infringe on my rights, right? And this infringes on my rights to dignity because it represents a time when there wasn't dignity for people like me, when there wasn't dignity for black people, for brown people, for older people, for all the people who weren't white in this country, right? And so I think that Ernest needs to deal very seriously with the idea that, like, the flag does represent sort of that history, but also deal very respectfully with what is being placed at court, right? That the flag is being allowed to be used for academic purposes. So for all the purposes that he wants of freedom of expression and speech, people can still write about it. It can be in a museum, but where it can't be is in public spaces, because that constitutes hate speech. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ernest, do you think that is enough? I mean, it's a question that I've asked you previously, but I don't think you necessarily answered it. If we are to have the flag, being used for academic purposes, is that not enough for you?
I don't think that is completely the extent of the bigger argument that is going on, especially now in court from AfriForum's perspective. I think the best way to sum it up is the saying that things get really bad 1 little centimeter at a time. So I think, to get back to my previous point, the idea of the real danger is not just, it's not this, I think it's, you can actually ironically use the hashtag that the Nelson Mandela Foundation used on Twitter today, more than a flag. And I do think it's more than a flag, because it's about the precedent. It's about the example that is being set that can be used in the future to further curtail freedom of expression. And then to get back to that other point, the idea of what is the next thing that will be banned. And I think, just to wrap it up, the idea of the fight for freedom of speech and the fight for freedom of expression is never easy. It is never a clean fight. It's never something that everyone can agree on. It's never something where everyone just gets pats on the back and gets a hand clap. It's really a fight where a lot of people, a lot of emotion is involved. A lot of people disagree. It gets very controversial. I mean, you don't have to really fight to protect the rights of people to say things that everyone likes. The debate for freedom of speech is about defending the rights of people to say things that some people might not like or find offensive. That is unfortunately the nature of the debate. I wish it wasn't so, but that is the unfortunate nature of the matter at hand.
The nature, I guess, of living in a democratic country.
Exactly.
Tevin, I mean, he's saying that it's going to set the wrong precedents. If we literally ban this, what else could be banned?
Well, I would just like to respond and say that the right to freedom of expression is not an absolute right. Our Constitution has an internal limitations clause in Section 36, and under Section 16 of the freedom of expression, it is internally limited. So you cannot say anything that's going to incite harm or that's gonna constitute hate speech. So we must remember that freedom of speech is not the only right that is promoted in a democracy. So a democracy shouldn't be centered solely on the right to freedom of expression.
Tato?
I mean, I can't make the point better, right? Like I said, dignity, right? And this infringes on that. And so, like, I think Ernest needs to respond to that, to the idea of dignity before we can,
Ernest, would you like to take that?
All right. Well, firstly, I think we should look at how the Constitution defines hate speech. Now, specifically, it says hate speech constitutes anything that is incitement to cause harm. Now, this was one of the big arguments that was made in court today, the idea of that the flag does not constitute an incitement to cause harm. And on the idea of dignity, I think I can put it very simply, the idea of that not just me, but AfriForum as an organization does not shy away from admitting that apartheid was wrong and human dignity was violated, definitely. So I don't think there's any disagreement in that regard.
Sure.
I find it ludicrous because not so long ago AfriForum said that apartheid was not a crime against humanity. And now you're saying that you see it as something that is wrong.
Right. Well, at the same time, I don't think something that is wrong and a crime against humanity can just be as easily equated. But I do think for the sake of argument and for the sake of conversation, people can go look. Our CEO, Kali Kriel, actually wrote a very extensive response to that very thing that you're mentioning now on News 24. I think something along the lines of, if you just Google, Kali Kriel, do not misrepresent AfriForum's stance on apartheid. So to keep it on topic, I would invite anyone to go read that for a more detailed stance on that very specific and nuanced matter.
All right, we will, of course, reflect more on your views. And I'll start with Musa, who's calling us all the way from Brum. Musa?
Good evening, Mr. Siwa, and to all the listeners and the studio guests.
Good evening to you. What's your take?
So I have two questions to Ernest from AfriForum. The first question is that, as a white South African, do you think that you benefit from undeserving white privilege that white people in this country got through the disposition of black people in the name of the same apartheid flag that you're defending? And the second question is that the apartheid flag as a symbol of racism and white supremacy, is it a propaganda for war? Does it incite imminent violence? Is it pushing for the advocacy of hatred that is based on race?
Okay, Musa, I'm gonna need you to just bear with us because Ernest is joining us via telephone. So maybe let's start with your first question, get him to respond, and then we'll move on to your second one.
Okay, so the first question, I'll just repeat it, are you, as a white South African, do you think that you benefit from the undeserving white privilege that white people in this country got through the disposition of black people in the name of the same apartheid flag that you're defending?
All right. Do you have that, Ernest?
Yeah, I have it. That's a very interesting question. I would have to respond that I do think on the matter of privilege, just as an idea, I think we need to understand that privilege is context dependent. So now, for example, even a billionaire with all his wealth privilege has zero privilege on a desert island. So in terms of privilege, I don't really believe that you can make race a proxy for privilege in terms of just because someone has white skin, they had some type of head start or some type of benefit from the start. I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So it's a bit of a tricky concept to just apply broadly with a broad brush across society.
So basically you're saying that you do not benefit from white privilege?
I think it's a too nuanced and complicated question to really answer yes or no. I think that's a completely different debate for another day, even though it's a very good question. And so I would have to say that I do think for the sake of the actual topic at hand, we're going to have to leave that for another day.
I think you raised that question because he's asking if you making the stance from a position of white privilege.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing is, it's not me personally. It is the court case that is going on. It's not me in court defending the flag or anything. It's rather an organization like AfriForum standing up for the principle of freedom of speech rather than just simply the flag. I think this gets back to that very good question you asked earlier.
So then what do you believe in then personally, which is the reason for my question in the previous segment about what the flag means to you personally?
I think personally that this is an incredibly important debate that we should be having because of the long-term implications that it will have. In terms of it might not seem like a big deal at the moment. In terms of it's just a small change in the bigger milieu of problems that South Africa is facing. But the precedent that it sets, and I have to get back to that very point, the precedent that it sets can have such a myriad of different negative effects in the long term that I think the quote that I used earlier, the idea of that tyranny creeps one little centimeter at a time, cannot be ignored. I mean, under apartheid, certain records and certain books were banned because they were deemed offensive. And that's something that I would have, if I lived under apartheid, would have definitely opposed.
All right. Musa, your second question to Ernest?
Okay, so my second question is that is the flag as a symbol of white supremacy and racism in South Africa a propaganda for war? Does it incite imminent violence, or is it pushing for advocacy of hatred that is based on race and that constitute incitement to cause harm?
All right, yeah, I think that's a very relevant question to the court case, because I see that's the connection to hate speech that you're drawing there, which is a good question. So the first one, is it propagating war, or is it incitement to war? I don't think so. Is it incitement to violence? I don't think you can, with a broad brush, say that every instance of the flag being displayed in public is incitement to violence. And I think you can also you can then draw the line to the idea of, is it a form of racism or a form of racial hatred? I would also, again, have to say you're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis. It's not just something you can broadly, with a broad brush, say in every case where the flag is publicly displayed that it constitutes any of those three things.
Musa, thank you so much for calling in. Lerato, I also see you waiting to for us to take your call there. That number is 011-772-0992. I'd like you guys to just briefly respond to Musa's question, as well as Ernest's response to it. Anything that you want to pick up from there, and then we'll continue taking more callers.
Yeah. So I think the discussion about that the demand for dignity and the demand for people to say that this flag represents something that we don't want in our lives, the suggestion that that's tyranny is something that I think is almost weird to do from Ernest, because it's like he's assuming that the demand for equality and the demand for sort of recognition as a human being is tyrannical, right? Which is bizarre. But also, why can't we say broadly, with a broad brush, that a flag that represents repression represents racism? That's it does, and so I think that we need to have that.
I mean, there's also that other point that people often raise, is that, I mean, if we can have struggle songs that says that we're gonna kill, isn't that the same thing?
I mean, I don't think so, and here's why, right? So the struggle songs,
and we do know that it is still sung by politicians.
Yeah. By me.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about struggle songs is what they represent, right? Is resistance from oppression, right? And so commemorating resistance from oppression, commemorating a non-racial future, because that's what we were doing, right? That's what we were saying, right? And that for me is something we want to keep, because it sort of echoes a non-racial future, which is the future we want.
Does it really echo a non-racial
so.
a future when it directly says, we will kill these people?
I think so. If you've reached the point of sort of trying to negotiate with people from 1800s to 1940, whatever, right? And negotiations haven't happened until then, it's okay when they forcibly repress you to be like, we're going to fight now, right? But for the ideal of non-racialism, for me and Ernest considering ourselves South African first and our racial group second.
Yeah, Ernest, I mean, what's your take on that on that comment from Tato?
Well, I think something that we should note is that in that song, I mean, you could actually make the argument there that it is an incitement to cause harm and therefore hate speech. But without going there, I think couldn't you make the exact same argument from the other perspective then, that the song's lyrics can be put up in a museum, it can be academically looked at, but it should be banned from public life because of the hate speech implications or the even potentially violent implications and consequences that it could have.
That's a very important point that I want Tevin to respond to.
Well, what I would like to say is that we need to look at it in a historical context. The apartheid flag, when it was displayed, sort of promoted the idea, or it sort of enhanced the outlook of the idea of the ultimate power that the apartheid machinery had over the black populace, whereas a liberation movement and their struggle songs were not on the same level playing field. And in response to your sort of blanket denial of white privilege, I think denial of white privilege is a symptom of white privilege. And in South Africa, we must remember that the apartheid flag not only sort of symbolized the oppression of people based on race, but also people in LGBTQ communities who were deprived of their sexual freedom during the apartheid era.
All right, Ernest?
To respond to that, I think I want to get back to, and actually this will tie in quite nicely to the path that this debate has gone on. A previous point that I made before the commercial break that I'd like to hear your thoughts on, both of you maybe if you want to, is the idea of that the old South African flag, or the 1928 flag, was brought into existence 20 years before apartheid. So exactly using that point that you just made, the idea of that if it was not an apartheid flag from the beginning, it was just the national flag that we fought the Nazis under, and then it became the national flag that the apartheid regime was under. Couldn't you then argue at the same time that the flag also has a nuanced past and not something that can just be with a broad brush claimed to be one thing when it can actually have a myriad of interpretations?
Tato?
One line, right? Repression and racism precedes apartheid. It happened before apartheid. It was intensified during apartheid. So, like, the idea that this isn't an oppressive flag is strange again. But yes.
All right, let's get a caller on the line. Amanda.
Hi.
Thank you so much for holding. Thank you for being patient. Your take?
No problem. I have to agree with Tato that the argument cannot be this flag existed prior to apartheid and make it seem as if, apartheid was the beginning of colonialism and racism within the South African context. This existed way before that, and apartheid simply reinforced it. So I definitely share the same views on that as Tato. However, it's important for me. The biggest thing that I'm asking myself at this point is, 25 years into democracy, why are we still having this conversation? This is something that I feel we should have dealt with as a country quite a while ago. I think at this point in time, it shouldn't even be a thing where we're even debating about it. It should be a very clear direction that we're taking as a country in terms of this. This is part of a history that is painful for the majority of people in this country. It brings about a lot of emotions, and it invokes a lot of emotions with people, and therefore it shouldn't even be up for discussion.
All
it
right.
Shouldn't be up for discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda, saying that this shouldn't even be up for discussion, especially at the back of celebrating, Freedom Day. Ernest, would you like to take this one?
No, thank you for your feedback. I find it very interesting. Thank you for calling in this late at night. I think an idea that everyone listening can ponder on is the old saying that goes, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." And I don't think the people that are calling for the ban of the South African flag are tyrants. I don't think they are authoritarians. But I do think the precedent that is set is laying the ground and laying the seeds of authoritarianism, even in a very small capacity. like I said earlier, the idea of these things are always motivated by good intentions. People that want to create a society where people are not offended, where there can only be positive and constructive arguments and discussions. But as we see with any debate regarding freedom of speech, it always gets down to the point where you have to stand up and defend the things that are offensive. That is the unfortunate, like I said earlier, that is the unfortunate nature of this debate. Is that if it was just about defending the things that 90% of people like hearing that aren't really controversial, then there would never actually be a freedom of speech debate. It would be very easy and actually be a world that I would want to live in.
Continuing to take more of your calls. Good evening and welcome to our talks.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. What's your take?
Good. So, here's the thing. The most dangerous thing about this country is the fact that we tend to have a serious amount of amnesia post-1994. Why I'm saying that is that just because the Freedom Charter and the Constitution propagates for freedom of speech and freedom of expression doesn't mean that we have to give expression and give life to something that we all concede as an entire country was wrong. The reason why Germany, for example, was able to go over the Holocaust and all the atrocities that happened during World War II was because they decided to have a very decisive approach on how they deal with those past injustices by outlawing any Nazi regalia in the whole country and ensuring that any right-wing populism that seeks to grow out in that country doesn't even have space or expression. Why was that important? Because people were never emboldened to repeat the same mistakes that they were doing in that past. And this is the same kind of thing that we cannot have here in this country. We cannot embolden people who wish for an apartheid utopia for themselves by raising a flag that represents a time when they were oppressing people heavily in South Africa. We can't call that that can't be coexistent with harmony and freedom and all those kinds of things if we want to move on as a country. But we keep allowing people to raise those kinds of things in the equation. I don't even think it's a debate that's supposed to be happening. It's actually very, very irritating because it's based on amnesia and nothing real and no real analysis coming out from AfriForum side of it.
Yeah. I mean, what does this say to you, the fact that we are actually still having this discussion after so many years of democracy? What does that say to you about, things like social cohesion and togetherness and, this rainbow nation idea that we've been sold?
Lucy, it says something like we never actually had a proper understanding or real consensus as to where we want to go as a country. We never had that consensus in the first place. Sure, we had the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We had all of these other things that came into the fore, but we never really had a conversation and consensus as to where we want to be going post-apartheid. Post-apartheid means literally condemning apartheid, means literally condemning anything that represents apartheid, that represents oppression and repression all together. That's what it means. That's where the point of departure ought to be. If those people, if the white people that keep raising these flags were told from the get-go that this is something that cannot be tolerated, then that means there would have been a real point of departure they'd be engaging from. They're engaging still from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. They still believe, there are some people that still believe literally that they can still get their own isolationist environment in this post-apartheid South Africa, in this rainbow nation narrative. It was a narrative that was thrown at us with no real control. And it came from the fact that, again, we didn't properly condemn apartheid. And now people are brave. People are raising flags. And now people are here in this debate defending that. I think it's absolutely disgusting. And we have a very big problem.
How do we then move forward from all of this? We are expecting to get a big judgment on this case. Where do you see it going?
Remember what happened in 2015? roads must fall. Roads fell. And UCT is transforming as a result of roads falling. Symbolism is very important for transformation altogether, because it means that the people that have power, the people that believed that they had power at the time, that power is completely destabilized by whatever symbol that represents the pseudo-power structure that they're sitting on top of right now. Same thing here. This flag must be banned. All kind of symbolism, regalia, that represents the MP, that represents apartheid, that represents that side of our country, must be completely outlawed from the public environment. Yes, like Tato said earlier, it can be academic. We can study it. It's nice to know our history, but it's not nice to be reminded in the streets as you're driving on the N1 that there's someone watching you with a flag hovering over. And as a black person, you're seeing that kind of image in your mind, reminding you of the pain and shock from the past. It's indicative of a lack of movement. We're stationary in the nation.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much there for your input. Of course, still getting a sense of what you feel about this particular issue. Should the South African or the old South African flag be banned? 011-772-0992. Of course, also getting most of your comments via social media. Tabile Ntuli on Facebook says it's all part of our history, whether bad or good. This is another way to distract us from things that really matter, like how are the people from KZN doing? When and how fast will the houses be built? Of course, Tabile there on Facebook saying that this is a distraction indeed, and we should be focusing on more pressing issues that are happening in our country. Buinelo Mudisekwa says it seems like we are complaining about nonsensical things as Africans. Next thing we'll be saying, next thing we'll be saying wearing khaki is racist because AWB members loved it. Just a mere flag. It does not mean anything. 011-772-0992. Get those tweets rolling in. What is your take on tonight's discussion? Akola, thank you so much for holding. I believe it's Sipo from the Northwest. Sipo?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. Thank you for joining us. What's your take?
I would like to speak on behalf of the people of Northwest. Like us at Northwest, we still have apartheid. The apartheid, it is still living among us. So what I think is like, I think the flag needs to be banned. Like what I mean, I'm from Majagani. About months back, a white farmer just shot a boy in the farm, and that boy's body that just disappeared. Like bringing up the flag is like bringing up the grief to us as the people of the Northwest people. Most of the people in Northwest, they still have that thing, the white people, they still have that thing of apartheid. They still have that anger of us having democracy. Remember, if you want to manipulate people, a flag is one of things. If you want to start a war, if you will start banning by a flag. See?
Yeah, I want to get a perspective from you, Khore. How does it feel to live in such an environment? I mean, I couldn't even, get a sense of it because I'm in an urban area, Joburg. We don't really get a sense of what you were talking about insofar as, living in a place where you feel like there is apartheid is still palpable for you, How does it feel to live in such an environment?
Yo, man. What I can tell you, it's hard, man. It's hard, very hard. Even like at work, to get a promotion as a black guy like me, it is hard. Like this thing is everywhere. It's like a disease, an airborne disease. It is hard because what I can tell you, like the boy that was shot about 8 months back in Majagani, it was my best friend. That boy was shot by a white farmer, and the body was never recovered, even now. Like I'm saying, the flag must be banned because it makes me angry even now. It makes me think of all the things that the white people or the white apartheid people that were doing to us. Remember, it's like when somebody come to your family and shoot your father. When I can, like, after months passes, somebody come and remind you about that thing. Hey, your father was shot. Remember, how will you feel? How will you feel? Everybody come to you each and every time, remind you how your father was shot. Hey, your father was shot in the dice. How will you feel? So that thing, I need it, like, even deeply in my heart, that flag to be banned, because that was the white people's flag. It was not our flag.
Thank you so much, Sipo. Of course, getting a perspective there of what's happening in the Northwest. Of course, I don't even want to lie to you. I mean, it's so emotional in studio, Ernest. I mean, how would you feel if that were to happen to you? Do you feel anything at all when you get a response like that from people who believe that the flag represents such a painful past? A past that they're still living in, actually, that is a present for them.
Right. No, it's a heart-wrenching story. I would lie if I said it didn't make me a little bit emotional. But at the same time, we have to understand that, and I think this can get back to a point that one of the other panelists made earlier in terms of saying that to sing Kill the Boer should not be banned. But how would you tell that to someone like me who has lost someone that I know in a farm murder, who was a farmer, and then you have a politician singing, shoot the farmer, shoot to kill? I mean, that's the same type of argument.
Yeah, Tevin?
You know what? I don't get the fixation of farm murders on the part of AfriForum. Maybe they're trying to appeal to their right-wing Afrikaner base. But what I'm trying to get at is that murders in South Africa is an issue. It is a non-racial issue, and I don't know why it's been construed to sort of generate this idea of a white genocide, to get the sort of sympathy. Sympathy for what? Sympathy for living sort of the best life, having the highest life expectancy amongst all races in this country. If I don't understand how you can be in a genocide and have the best life expectancy at the same time.
No, I'm just saying it is a ridiculous idea because there is no white genocide. That is not something that I would tell anyone because it is so bizarre and it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, farm murder, we do have a farm murder epidemic, and we have a problem in terms of that it is more dangerous to be a farmer than a policeman in South Africa if you look at the stats. But now, before this turns into a debate about farm murders, I just want to make the point that I think the main point that we are talking about is the idea of what should be banned and what should not be banned in terms of offense. And I do think me personally coming from a farming community, a community that has been definitely touched by farm murders in general, if you make the argument that you should be allowed to sing a song like Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, Shoot to Kill, and you sing that in a public space with people that have lost family in that manner, you could make the same type of argument for the banning of that song in public. So I do think we need to be consistent when we are if we are going to ban things, we need to be consistent on all fields.
It's My Talks on 99.2 YFM. Now, we're talking about the old South African flag and whether it should be banned or declared at least unconstitutional. Now, a lot of flag experts that I'm hearing from on Twitter are saying that it can be perfectly legal to own or display the old South African flag, but people should be mindful that it could also be considered insensitive and offensive to show it off. Some experts even going on to say that obviously you can use it at home, but if you stick it outside or wear it to a rugby match, then obviously that would be a problem. But the overall question is, why is it that we are, negotiating and still discussing this 25 years into democracy? Shouldn't the flag be just banned from the onset? And I'm speaking to Ernest van Zyl from AfriForum, Tato Mokoena and Tevin Ramalu. Also getting your calls on 011-772-0992. Good evening, you're live on Y.
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'm okay. So I just have one question for Mr. Ernest
All right, so this is Piwe from Benoni, ne?
Yeah.
All right, Piwe, what's your question?
So Okay. The question is that regardless of the old flag, if it reminds us of apartheid and all of that doesn't matter. The question is that as one country, how can you fly two flags? That on its own doesn't make sense. It's you have South Africa, we have a flag. How is it possible for us to fly two flags? Why don't you take the old flag, take it to the museum? It will teach us about where we're coming from. But we cannot fly two flags as a country. So why AfriForum is defending that and wants something more? Actually wants the flags to be legalized.
All right, Speecher, thank you so much. We're calling us from Benoni. Ernest, why should we have two flags, he says?
I think the thing that we should keep in mind is that the amount of reasons why someone would think of waving a flag in South Africa, whether it be the old South African flag or the blue bull flag or whatever, is that there could be a myriad of reasons. And I think you can ask that question you can go look up the articles. There have been appearances of the old South African flag at service delivery protests where black South Africans were waving the flag in some form of protest against the ANC. Now, I would actually like to request that the person calling in actually ask those people why were they waving a second flag.
And which protest was this, Ernest?
Well, I don't have it in front of me right now. It was mentioned today in the court, actually. That's why I remember it. But you can just Google the waving of old South African flags at a service delivery protest, and you should be able to find it.
All right.
So that's I would ask them the question. Now, I can't climb into their mind. I don't know why they would fly it. If I see someone flying it in public, I don't know why exactly they're doing it. Maybe they're doing it out of some bizarre form of protest. Maybe they're trying to do something artistic with it without saying outright that this is artistic. There was another case in 2017, I think, where there was a black woman that wore a dress that was made out of the old South African flag, and the picture went viral across social media. Now, would you say she was propagating hate speech, that she was spreading a type of message that someone should have walked up to her and said she should leave the premises and even face some type of legal repercussion because of it?
Okay, we'll definitely have a look out for that and keep our listeners posted on that. I think it's a very important point to go back on. Still getting your calls on 011-772-0992. Dudu?
Yes, Tanafani. You know what, man? Apartheid regime actually affected a lot of black South Africans. I'm so ashamed when I hear that other black people are still wearing an old flag. To me, it's such humiliating. It's an humiliation for people who fought for the freedom. I'm not saying they are 100% correct in whatever they did or whatever is going on right now. Every South African is so worried. Petrol prices are going up and all that. But let's just think of the people who fought for us to drive cars as women, who fought for us to go to school as women. People like Mandela. People who were prisoned just to say we are all the same. So to me, it's such a disgrace that today we are actually still negotiating about two flags. There is nothing like two flags, because in the first place, South Africa had their own South African flag. That was for the apartheid regime. Whereas the ANC government had before it became the government, it had their own colors to say, okay, we are the ANC. And this is the apartheid, the Boers flag. So today we're discussing that we should use both flags, whereas this one flag that the South Africa has, it was a combination to say, let's come together. It was never going to be easy to come together, being honest with you, because we had a lot of differences and we had a lot of hate between us.
Yeah, Dudu, thank you so much for that. I'm sorry for cutting you. I just want to get through as many callers as I can. Thank you so much for your input. Ariatile on Twitter says the old flag needs to go. We all know that it represents and needs to stop making dumb excuses for people who still have pride in it. Those people are indeed racist. They're basically saying non-white oppression was a better time in South Africa, so it needs to go, she says. At Busisiwe_G on Twitter. And on Facebook, Paul B says it once stood for oppression of blacks, but it's freedom of expression, and the flag is part of South African history. I think the country has better issues to attend to than the old flag. And of course, if you are one of the people who believe that the flag should stay, do of course tag me on Twitter. I would like to get your response to that. Let's take more callers. Good evening.
Hello.
Hello, caller.
Hi.
Hi, please introduce yourself and where are you calling from?
Okay, so it's James. I'm calling from Rotherham.
All right, what's your take?
Yeah, so just two things that I'd like to articulate. And it's really just commentary. So I agree with what one of the previous callers spoke on about the flag and its symbolism and what it represents. So obviously there's a lot of negative connotation that's associated with that flag as it relates to non-white South Africans in SA. I don't think that can be debated too much. That's a fact. But I think what we tend to lose at times is actually understanding from the other party why they would want that flag to still be part of our culture, South Africanism, as it were, moving forward, or in the new dispensation. What is it about that flag that is good that needs to be carried forward? So I think we often lose that people want this flag, but why do you actually want it when, for a vast majority of the population, this is what it symbolized? So we need to actually unpack the merit and debate that versus getting into this us and them situation, which tends to happen, by my own observation, when you deal with racial issues.
All right, thank you so much for that. Let's go to Little Khonolo from Soweto. Little Khonolo, what's your take?
My take is that the flag should be abolished. My first comment would have to be directed towards the whole argument about the Kill the song. There was a constitutional case about that song where Julius Malema was challenged by the AfriForum about using it and inciting hate speech and violence through the use of the song. And the court held that the song should be abolished and never to be used in a public space. So if we can abolish the song as black people who saw it as a justified means to deal with the oppression, it has given us a stepping stone to invert the roles and destroy a symbolic form of apartheid. So that is the direction in which we should move. And I don't think Ernest should use the song as a premise upon which he can justify the existence of such a flag. The question that I would like to direct to Ernest is it justified for us to preserve a particular view of nationalism, a particular symbol of nationalism, at the expense of a majority that was blatantly abused by the view of nationalism? We can't do those kind of things. We're already doing them in having a state within a state, like having Orania, which is not sustainable for a democracy. Yes, you can argue you can have privacy as a gated community, but in the broader scale of things, it creates the idea of apartheid festering amongst us.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to have to just pay the bills quickly and pose that question again to Ernest.
No, I got it.
All right. So you'll answer the question when we return, Ernest. Please hold on for me. Twinkie Letula on Facebook says, I don't think it should be burnt necessarily, but maybe it should be seen or preserved in apartheid museums and everyone could be happy. So obviously getting very different views on both sides, on when people also saying that, it represents oppression, therefore it has no place in our democracy. Perhaps, Ernest, let's get your last wrapping, comments. Of course, we are running out of time. We can never, debate this complex discussion in 2 hours, but
Right.
we did the best that we could.
No, I would just like to start off by saying thank you very much for the very enjoyable and civil conversation. I know talking about controversial matters has the potential to become very flammable or even get to a point where it's no longer enjoyable to listen to, but I've enjoyed it so far very much to be part of this conversation. Now, I've got, I think, 3 or 4 calls to respond to, so I'll try and give the best in general answer. I think the one thing that was brought up that I found very interesting was one of the callers said that displaying the flag shows a fondness for the past and shows that always making the claim that displaying the flag in public makes the claim that things were better under apartheid or certain things worked better or whatever. Now, what would that caller, just a rhetorical question, what would that caller say about the fact that Rampele has said that education was better under apartheid, or even Malema saying that healthcare was better under apartheid? Would he criminalize that type of speech that they said, or even condemn that type of speech? And then to get back to the other 2 calls, I think I can answer them both at the same time, the last 2 we had. I think the calls for banning the flag in public fly dangerously close to, for example, the same justification we see in other countries for blasphemy laws in other religious countries, where it is illegal to use, for example, that religion's God's name in vain, or to say anything defamatory about that God. And then also, and I think this is the idea that I want to end off on, is the idea of we need to remember and I use this word a lot, but it's the only word I know for this exact same thing, and it's the precedent that is set. The idea of if we set the precedent where we give the state the power to ban one thing, like the flag, for example, what is stopping that state from banning other things? That is like saying, I'm only going to take one hit of heroin and that's going to be it. I think if we look at history, censorship tends to be a very messy affair, and it tends to always escalate to a point where we are back at the dark times where we were in the past, where things like music and books and certain speech and political parties are outlawed. And I think that's why I want to leave it on.
And you don't think it's quite unfair to say that things were better in, during the apartheid years in the context of what we are discussing tonight?
I don't. If you're asking me personally, I don't think things were better under apartheid, but I do think it is definitely one of those questions where, again, this is a completely different debate for another day. The idea of if we are comparing the post-1994 society with pre-1994 society with a post-1994 society in terms of what has improved, what is not, what is lagged behind, I think that is a very interesting but also a very different conversation for another day. The idea of comparing the progress that we have made across society and across all the plethora of issues that we face as a country.
Okay, I'm out of time to respond to that. Let me get Tato to give me your closing arguments.
My closing argument is Pure ended the debate when he said, why fly 2 flags, right? Because the flying of a national flag is an expression of national pride. And if you're flying a national flag in a country who've moved past that sort of nation of divided by race and by class and whatever, then you're proud of it, right? That's what you're saying. And so to fly the flag is to say you're proud of the nation South Africa once was, and not proud of this one, maybe, I don't know. But I think the debate ends there. We have one flag, and that flag is the one we have currently.
Yep, Tevin.
In my closing remarks is that I think AfriForum needs to go back to the legal sort of commentary and assess the legal position once more. They need to understand that we're under a South African constitution, not one that comes from Orania. And basically that the right to freedom of expression can be limited in Section 16 and Section 36. It's not an absolute right, and it does not affect our democracy if it is limited in the interest of the other rights in the Bill of Rights.
Getting more of your views on Twitter, and that number, obviously, I think we better close those lines. But on Twitter, Ati Mufwele says that Ernest's calculations and statistics are just pure rubbish. They don't make sense to me. And lastly, Fortune says that for me, no, I think for the Bill of Rights, that is what we have to uphold. Thank you so much, of course, Ernest, for joining us tonight. How do you see this matter unfolding? Of course, we are still waiting on a response from the court. You have been attending these sessions. What do you hope to achieve?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's going to be still a long wait before we get a conclusion from this whole case. I don't think we're going to hear anything before after the election. So at the moment, from what I picked up, I think it's a very up in the air result. I think both sides made very compelling arguments. But at the same time, I hope this court case in general brings the topic of freedom of speech back into the fore. Because as we see now, and I heard earlier, you were reading the news headlines and you were reading about what was happening in Venezuela. And I mean, if you look at what's been happening there in the past 2 years, just the absolute limiting of freedoms and rights of those citizens, and especially in terms of freedom of speech. I mean, just now, breaking news, an hour ago, CNN was taken down in Venezuela in terms of now it's completely dark there. So I do think the freedom of speech debate is incredibly important. I think it has far-reaching effects. It affects every one of us, and it will affect the coming generations after us. And I do think there's a lot of nuance in it. And I wish we had more than the allocated time to talk about it, because we could talk forever almost. And I do appreciate everyone that called in. Very good questions and very good input. Definitely thought-provoking.
Thank you so much, Ernest. Of course, just ending on some of your tweets, at Msiki on Twitter says we should not even be discussing this issue anymore. It should have been a common sense a long time ago. This means that those who were proud of that flag are still encouraging their kids to do the same, refusing to be cultured in the new democracy. At Sir Thomas on Twitter says the past should stay in the past. We should learn and have a better future as South Africans. Thank you so much, Tato, for coming through. How do you see it unfolding for you?
I think legally, I think that NMF might still lose yet. Simply because I think that the precedent hasn't been set for something like this to happen, I think.
I see it not being decided ultimately in the Equality Court. I see it going further, maybe to the Supreme Court of Appeal or the Constitutional Court. And I do think that there is precedent, and that we can look at international cases such as Germany.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. Of course, you can catch more proper conversations next week, Monday as well as Tuesday. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.